Hello, my dear viewers. Welcome to a new episode, as he's trying to do something new. But actually, when you watch this episode, you'll know that it's not different. And that the name Hitler could be a click, bait to get you to watch, but the story itself is really strange. Let me tell you, our story starts on 10th May 1940, in the middle of Germany's victories in World War. After Germany taking over Austria, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France to see Hitler's famous picture next to the Eiffel Tower. At that time, on that day, 10th May 1940, amidst Germany's victories, there was a Scottish farmer chilling in his house laying in his bed around midnight when he heard a strange sound. McLean went outside to check it out, where he was surprised by a German fighter plane burning 2 feet away from him, and the pilot was hanged from his parachute on his way to the ground. Closing up on him, McLean ran to the pilot, who was obviously wearing German uniform. An enemy! You'd expect that McLean showered him with fists all over and got people to beat him too. But McLean smiled at the pilot while helping him get up, because the pilot's leg was injured on landing the parachute. Like any farmer, McLean took this German pilot to his home and welcomed him. A true English farmer, and made him a true English cup of tea, and hosting him for being injured. But the German pilot apologized and replied with a smile when McLean was telling him about the English love for tea. McLean described the pilot as tall, with a chick pilot as tall, with a chick pilot uniform, a watch, and a gold identification bracelet. And that he was a gentleman, talking English in a weird accent, but with clear and understandable sentences. And that the pilot was very confident and sure he'd be treated well, although he could have been beaten up. The German pilot identified himself as Captain Albert Horn from Germany, carrying an important message for Douglas Hamilton, and as he walked around, he told anyone he passed by that he wanted to meet Duke Hamilton. Until he was taken by the Scottish National Security, and they took him to a nearby military barrack till morning, when the Duke arrived and met the pilot, who uncovered his real identity for the Duke for the first time. I'm not Horn, I'm Rudolf! Yes, welcome! But who are you? I'm the first deputy Führer to the most important man in the world now. President Biden? What? Oh, what? Oh, what? Oh, the surprise. Rudolf Hess was born in 1894. He wasn't born in Germany. Nor in Europe, Hess. For the irony, was born in Ibrahimia. Where's that? Bro? Ibrahimia. My friend? My friend. In our Egypt. What? Hitler's first deputy was born in Ibrahima, huh? So Churchill's assistant could be from Gleam. Just so you know, my friend, that Egypt had a vital role in World War. Hey! Other than Battle of El Alamein, Hess actually studied in a German school in Alexandria. He lived for a long time in Alexandria during his childhood. I still can't get over the irony, my friend, that Hitler's first deputy ate Alexandrian food, walked in its streets, and rode local Alexandrian transport. Hess stayed in Alexandria until he was 14 years old. At that time, Egypt was under the British colonialism, so in other words, Hess was the only one from the Grand Nazi leaders who practically grew up under British rule. During that time, he grew fond of the British model of racist colonialism. He believed that there are two kinds of peoples, ones that are destined to rule the world like Britain and Germany, and ones that are destined to submit to others. In 1908, Hess went back to Germany. About time. Hess started studying economics in 1911 based on his father's wish, who wanted him to take over the family business. But on 28 June 1914, a Serbian student assassinated Austria's heir and his wife. Since then, a world war started that we later knew as World War I, because it was just World War. Because it was just World War. They hadn't signed for Season 2 at that time. Hess here refused to live under his father's shadow and joined the German army. Hess wasn't in the army just to spend his time and leave, or took advantage of his family's wealth to spend his recruitment time near his home. Instead, he participated in the war's most dangerous battles, like the Battle of Verdun, and received more than an award, like a second-class Iron Cross and then a War Merit Cross. He was injured twice, once with a shrapnel in his arm and another with a bullet in his chest. But even all these injuries didn't stop him from returning to the army after them. Once he got back on his feet, he went back He also asked to join the most dangerous German military force, aviation. Indeed, he started training as a pilot, but before he started his actual role, the war ended with Germany's loss and signing the Treaty of Versailles in 1918. This treaty was described by many historians as it carried in its womb the fetus of world warring. Because despite its attempt to prevent Germany from forming a strong regular army and replay the bully role in Europe, this treaty created economic and political crises and paved the way for public outrage that led to the emergence of Nazism and then what's known as World War. The German army was stripped of its heavy weapons, and mandatory enlisting was cancelled. The army was restricted to 100,000 soldiers without any air force. The navy was restricted to 15,000 soldiers. And military submarines manufacture was forbidden. That's besides the horrific compensations imposed on Germany that were around 269 million German mark. Hess felt a doubled sense of defeat. He was let go from the army in December 1918. Not just that, his family business in Egypt was confiscated by the English. So, your army had lost, and you did too, while being injured, and your belongings in Egypt were taken by the English army. All that happened under the constraining Treaty of Versailles. You couldn't even revenge. Your army was undernumbered, no submarines, and no heavy weapons. These conditions' effect was massive. This treaty was humiliating in the minds of Hess and many Germans. I just want you to imagine, my friend, that despite all these unjust sanctions and conditions, that man with the mustache took German and had it take over Austria, Czechoslovakia, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Norway, Denmark, a part of France, and almost wiping out Britain's aviation. Not for the greed and Mussolini. He would have conquered the world. So this time, after knowing Hitler could have taken over the world, it's not. It's your fault, Mussolini, but it's thank you, Mussolini. Anyway, a new generation was forming in Germany at that time. Among them were Hess and Hitler. That generation was busy wondering about reasons of defeat and contempt towards German politicians. Many of them had taken part in the war and underwent military training. These young men were scattered among different political parties, whether right wing or left wing or left wing. Many of them were semi-armed parties. They had a military branch to protect them in street battles that would happen between them and their political opponents. Hess was one of these young men who were fanatic towards Jews. Not just that, he participated in multiple street battles in the early 20s. At that same time, Hess started studying history and economics in Munich University, where he met one of the most influential characters in his life, Professor Karl Haushofer, the ex-general in German army, and one of the callers for the concept of living space. And in German, this difficult German word I'm saying was the one that Hitler heard from Hess and liked. Hitler, when he heard it, said, "Yes, I was missing the theoretical base. I've always been brilliant, but I needed a head. Start. I want a manual to run on." Thank you, Hesses. Hitler built his ideas on Germany's necessary expansion in Eastern Europe, like it was the normal thing for Germany to do. Germany had to take over that area to enrich its resources and fulfill its destiny as a superpower country. That was an important base for Hitler's expansion views later on, and one of the reasons why he took over Eastern European countries in white. The two first met in 1920, Hess and Hitler, and from that moment, Hess admired Hitler and he was completely loyal to him. Both of them were loyal to the idea of Germany being stabbed in the back by the Jews and the Russian Bolsheviks. I didn't come up with that metaphor, though. This theory was commonly known by that name then, the stab in the back. In the same year, Hess met the love of his life. Ilse, if you struggle with starting conversations with your crush, look what Hess told Ilse on their first date in 1920. He said, "I'll tell you about a man, Ilse. Unknown man that I heard from but forgot his name. But he's the only one who can free us all from the Treaty of Versailles. It's only him, that unknown man. He's the one who'll bring back our glory. Mr. Hess, I have news for you, a good one and a bad one." The good one is this is great. Inspirational, and won't subject you to jail. Hopefully. The bad one is that you're on your first date. Why are you praising someone other than the one you're sitting with? Maybe she also liked him, bro. So they had something in common. That's worse, my friend. Worse! Away from that. Thank God. He managed to marry her at the end. They have their only son, Wolf Rudiger, in 1937. Focus on the name, because Hess here named his son after Hitler himself. Isn't Hitler called Adolf Hitler? He himself? Isn't Hitler called Adolf Hitler? Come on, my friend. What? You wouldn't remember the Luftwaffe. Hitler's code name was Wolf. Wow, bro, that's the code name. How different is Wolf from Adolf? These little things are what cost you the war twice. Description! Like what Hess said about Hitler. In the letter he sent to Ilse, showed how much Hess admired Hitler. It was a real admiration, not just liking his ideas. Hess was personally fascinated by Hitler, who at that time had no political status or any street popularity. He truly believed in him, to the point where Hess told Ilse that this man would solve Germany's problems without knowing anything about him. In the same year, Hess took a reckless decision of joining Nazi Party, making him the 16th member. There was only 15 members before him, at a time where Nazism was just a dream, without any practical thinking about how can a small party like this change the future of Germany. For Hess, the belief in a dream like this was enough, even if that dream was among the ugliest events of history. After Hitler made it to being the chief of Nazi Party, the popularity of the party over Germany was still limited, so it was impossible to reach leadership through elections. But from 1920, 1 to 1920, 1 to 1923, he got the chance. That time, Germany went through a phase of hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is like the worldwide inflation nowadays, bro. What we're in right now, my friend, it's just inflation. That was hyper. Inflation. Stream. Crazy like Noel Robinson's hair. In 1923, hyperinflation had $1 equals trillion German mark. What? Does that even happen? Here? A million mark. Go get yourself some candy. On 8th November, 1923, Hitler and a group of Nazi elites stormed into a political meeting for the country's leaders in Munich. Hitler tried then to overthrow the government. Definitely participated in that attempt, but he wasn't one of the planners. Whoa, it was that simple. Yes, my friend. For people like Hess and Hitler, things were that simple. The distance between dream and destiny was short, and achieving the dream was just a matter of time. This was why they were dangerous. After the failure of the coup, Hess participated in a violent demonstration for the putschists, where it ended at the death of 16 members of the party, capturing Hitler, along with a number of coup participants. Hitler was sentenced for 5 years in jail. Hess was sentenced for 5 years in jail. Hess was sentenced for 18 months. Later, they were in a coup demonstration. Did a coup, and were just missing to actually be upside down. And these were their sentences. You're right, my friend. But you don't know that Hitler's popularity was rapidly increasing, especially when people heard him talking in court when he was allowed to speak. It said that these attenuated sentences were a result of the judges themselves being empathetic to the coup participants. Until here. Hess and Hitler's relationship was like a one-sided crush. Hess liked Hitler. But Hitler didn't know him! One-sided like me, bro. One side. You'd wish to be on one side. You're a fraction now. Until Hess got the chance. And when he knew that Hitler was under arrest, instead of forgetting the past and starting a new life in Austria, where he ran off after the coup failed, he decided to turn himself in. Hitler and Hess's friendship got deeper thereon, when they were put in the same prison. In prison, Hitler wrote his most famous book that everyone claims to have read when they didn't, including me, which is, by the way, the first recommendation from librarians, no matter how old you are, or your religion, or problems, or social status. Here, read my struggle. I want to tell you that this library has 7 of my struggle. Let me tell you that this book isn't only attributed to Hitler, but also to Hess, who helped him write it, and also edit it, and also edit it. He was like, through Hess, Hitler got to know the idea of living space, Lebensraum. That was the base of his expansions later on. That was the dream stage. Without big popularity in the street, just psych up angry young men. Extremists. Violent and defeated. No one in the world expected that these men would achieve anything. Hitler at that time saw in Hess a loyal friend who was satisfied with being his follower. The normal meaning, bro. Or Yusuf Zidane's. Yes. Never sought any power as much as he sought closeness to Hitler. He didn't represent any threat to Hitler comparing to the people around him. He felt like he can be put in the friend zone. You asked him where he sees himself in 5 years. He'd say wherever with you. Unlike most of Hitler's followers, Hess didn't have any real desire in having power. In prison, Hess was Hitler's unofficial secretariat. I don't know what he did, my friend. Like, did he get him in the base early or book him a place in the prison's bathroom? Maybe set up a meeting in the individual cells? That's until they were released from jail after a year and a few months of sentencing. When they didn't finish their sentence yet. How is it a year and a few months? Was it a traffic sentence, bro? How much does a coupe worth in Germany? Anyway, since then and Hitler's political climbing began, alongside him always and directly, Rudolf Hess, who was appointed as Hitler's private secretary in 1925, and his personal adjutant in 1925, and his personal adjutant in 1929. He was the only person who could meet Hitler anytime without scheduled times. After a year, when Hitler was a Führer leader for the German Reich, it was normal that Hess be appointed as the deputy Führer. We see him then in processions and public speeches, presenting Hitler with over-the-top excitement, and with sentences like, "Hitler is the party, Hitler is Germany, Germany is Hitler, I'm Hitler and you're Hitler, and who doesn't have one could buy one." Mind you here, that Hess wasn't a great propaganda master. He wasn't Goebbels, neither a well-articulated speaker like Goebbels too, nor did he praise Hitler just to get something. He said the things he really believed in. He wasn't a hypocrite, which was worse. I could accept that someone doubts my intentions, but not my intelligence. He believed in every word he said, that Hitler was the father, the mother, Germany, the party, and the beginning and ending of everything. With Hitler finally being in charge, the first dream of Nazism was fulfilled, to lead Germany. That's when there was the need for clever people. Did you hear me? Clever people? I said clever! These clever would lead the country with an iron fist and execute Hitler's dream on reality, and also fight on the power and status among each other, which was a game that Hess was too weak for. He was the loser among them. Ever more of a loser than Meredith from The Office. Maybe because his true motivation wasn't the power, but closeness to Hitler, the closeness that had competition by then, and was way harder than prison days. When we used to wash our clothes together, things were easier, but now with all that power and status, I can't work with him anymore. It's like I kept him a captive to like me. He used to praise Hitler a lot. With the beginning of World War, Hess started to feel outcast. Although he was still the deputy Führer and the third man in the leadership sequence after Hitler and Göring, he wasn't present in important meetings, like planning Polish War, and he wasn't present in Hitler's visit to France. You guys are going out to invade without me. Screw this friendship, man. I wanted a photo with the Eiffel. It's okay, Hess. We left you in Germany, so we don't leave Germany alone, because we trust you. At the time when Hess's colleagues' scores were increasing and getting closer, like Göring with his victories in Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, and Goebbels, the devil of Nazi propaganda, and Himmler, principal of secret police. Not just that, even from competitors of second-class Nazism, whom some of them were working under Hess himself, like Albert Speer, who became a close friend of Hitler, or Hess's assistant, Martin Bormann, who replaced Hess in determining who met Hitler and who didn't. Hess himself helped them reach these positions. I hate judgments outside their historical context, but I would claim that this man could be a clown. We don't know if it was good intention on his side or political stupidity, or a trust that no one could replace him with Hitler. Gradually, Hess started feeling lonely and started to fill his time with things like horoscope, fortune-telling, telepathy, and magic. I honestly feel sorry for that man. He was born a good Alexandrian in Ibrahim. He could have been a rapper or something with the guys. Imagine a German born in Alexandria with opportunities. His career kept going down. He was Hitler's assistant in prison. And the more he was promoted, the further he got from Hitler. And the ones below him were growing closer. Anyway, Hess started believing in magic, horoscope and stuff like that, to the point where one time an employee walked in and found him focused on a chair, and when he asked him what he was doing, he said he was trying to teleport him. Us was Hess, tyrannical. Gradually, the major leaders in Germany noticed these tendencies. Speer reported a sentence said by Hitler after talking with Hess for hours. Each conversation became a painful and unbearable torture. He always comes to me with annoying issues and refuses to tell them go. Another one, I hope I won't have to give him the leadership one day. I don't know. Who will I be more sorry for, Hess or the party? Useless sacrifices. Let me tell you that. Hess. Emotional state was Hitler's least of problems. The war was already on fire, and the German aviation failed in invading Britain, and Hitler was getting ready to open fires with the Soviet Union as well. Yeah. Hess thought he needed to do something useful for the man to like him again. He began planning his trip to Britain. The one we started the episode with the Scottish farmer, and refused the tea. Hess retrained on aviation and asked for modifications for the plane he was flying to have it be driven by one pilot instead of two, and adding an extra fuel tank. Of course, all these orders come to reality when they were ordered by the Deputy Führer himself. All that was done without any questions. On 10th May 1940, after days of his last meeting with Hitler, Hess wrote a long letter and asked his assistant to give it to Hitler, personally, if he wasn't back in 4 hours. Imagine someone with average experience in aviation, and as we see in the episode, in life, was going to fly alone for a long distance with the risk of being bombed by the German air defense. Or the British one later in the trip, and in the midst of raging war between both sides, just to reach a place he never went before. When the plane's fuel was almost over, without reaching a landing spot, he jumped with a parachute for the first time in his life. Not just that, he succeeded in that plan. We see again someone with a rooted belief that he was on his way to fulfill his destiny of saving Germany and restoring his place next to the closest person he had. I wished I could ask you, bro, if it was his wife or his son, but I know you mean Hitler. Good job, my friend. But on the other side, Hess proved his complete ignorance to the other party. The British, with Churchill, above all. Hess's meeting with Douglas. Hamilton in Scotland on his second day of parachute landing. He said he was negotiating for peace with Britain, where Britain kept most of its colonies outside Europe, but Germany took over Europe. That sounds fair! This could have been logical if anyone other than Churchill was Britain's prime minister. Churchill at that time believed in Britain's high chances of winning the war with Britain standing up for Germany's airstrikes, and his expectation that the US would join the war as his ally. Which did happen. But Hess's words indicated that he didn't study the ones he was negotiating with. England was no longer the old feudal country he used to know, so Duke Hamilton didn't have the effect he expected on Churchill, not even on the royal family, too. At that time, Hess's letter made it to Hitler. Here lies the biggest question regarding Rudolf Hess. Did Hitler already know about that plan? Actually, Hess denied since day one Hitler knowing about the trip, which was one of the reasons his plan had failed. Because Churchill refused meeting and listening to him. With all due respect to the account, where's the blue verification symbol? Where's the delegation? You jumped at me with a parachute. You jumped at me with a parachute. And in Scotland, not Westminster. And it seems you can't even jump. Looks like Germany wanted to get rid of you, so they sent you here. Who are you? But in 2011, the German Historical Institute in Moscow uncovered a note written by Hess's assistant, Karl-Heinz, the same person who gave Hitler Hess's letter and was captured and imprisoned by the Soviet. Karl-Heinz in this note said that Hess's mission was military alliance with England, or at least neutralizing it before Hitler directed his attacks towards the Soviet Union during the investigations with the assistant in the archive. Karl-Heinz said that Hitler wasn't surprised when he knew about Hess's getaway, and that he just read the last paragraph out loud. In case this trip failed, you can always deny any responsibility. He meant Hitler. Simply just say I'm crazy. You are. Okay. Say I'm delusional. That happened indeed. In the same day that Hess met Duke Hamilton, the German media outlets announced that the Deputy Führer was delusional and mentally unstable, and justified his mental state with the injuries he had during World War I. See, Goebbels, a poison and a devil. When they were asked why they hired him if he was crazy, they said he was a war hero and on our side, so we wanted to benefit from him. There has to be an episode on Goebbels. That's the least thing he did. If that episode reached 200 likes, I'll think of an episode about Goebbels. Just thinking. If it made it do 300, I'll think more seriously. What about 400 likes, bro? Don't put a responsibility on me. That's too much pressure. I won't do it. Just make it to 300 and I'll think seriously. Our evidence is that the investigation of Karl-Heinz was under torture that went as far as complete disfiguration of his hands. Not just that. This story doesn't coincide with others of Hitler receiving the news. Albert Speer started as an employee under Hess's management, then made it to the first engineer for the Third Reich, and one of the closest people to Hitler. He talked about Hitler's breakdown once he read the letter, and was worried that all that was a starter for a coup, and that this news would cause problems with his allies in Japan and Italy. In an interview with him after getting out of prison, Speer denied describing Hess as crazy. He described him as strange and a bit hysterical, which was close to the British psychiatrist's description that he wasn't crazy. But mentally unstable or delusional. Hess' family, on the other hand, thought differently. They believed Speer's testimony was true. But Hitler, with brilliant acting, according to Rudolf Hess's son, in an interview in 1995, said that Hitler knew about the trip before it had happened, and saw that Hess's trip preparations and his travel without having problems with the German defense were evidences of Hitler's prior knowledge. Whether Hess was sane, unstable, or crazy, was all this enough to justify his travel to Britain in the middle of war? Was this of psychological reasons, as described by British psychiatrists when they met him there? Among them, his fascination with Britain, and that a part of it came from his childhood in a Britain-ruled country, Egypt? Or was it for strategic reasons? And that Hess was like some Nazi leaders against having two wars at the same time. In a war with Britain on a side, and in a war with Russia on the other. You're the crazy one, Hitler! He saw that neutralizing Britain was needed before opening fires with the Soviet. Or maybe it was a racial reason, because the British and Germans were from the same Aryan race. Or was it all an attempt to search for a role, and countering the outcasting he experienced? Or maybe it was all a conspiracy, and the one traveled wasn't Hess, but a look-alike. Let me tell you that this was a popular theory for some time, but was debunked with a data analysis in 2019, proving that the person who traveled to Britain was Rudolf Hess. In 1945, World War, I ended and Hitler suicided. But Hess started a new chapter of his life after the Nuremberg trials, and being sentenced to life prison on 1st October 1946 for 2 counts, crimes against peace, and conspiracy with other German leaders to commit crimes. Hess then went to the place where he spent the second half of his life for more than 40 years, which was Spandau Prison. This prison held 7 Nazis as prisoners since 1947, and Hess was number 7. And the beginning of imprisonment, prisoners weren't allowed to talk with each other. Newspapers were forbidden, and so was writing journals or diaries. They were allowed one visit from their families every 2 months for 15 minutes. Gradually, the ones who left did, and the ones who died did. Starting 1966, Hess was the only one left who was famous with a new title, the most expensive prisoner in the world. Because he was the only prisoner in the castle being guarded by the countries of the Allies alternatively. Imagine being in a prison kept by the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, a mixed pie of allies. Not just that, all the people in the prison, the chef and the security and everything is solely for you. These people were paid salaries just for you. Again, I want you to put this in the context of our story. There were families being fed just because Hess was in prison. Let me tell you that for 21 years, Hess lived in that prison guarded by 37 soldiers, the prison commandant, chef doctor, and a man of religion. That was the most served. Prisoner. Imagine if Hess changed his religion. A man of religion would retire. That's why the prison's commandant, Eugene Bird, wrote a book about his memories with Hess and called it The Loneliest Man in the World during these years. The restrictions were relatively loosened. He was allowed a visit from a family member once a month under supervision. He was allowed to read the newspapers, but after having them cut to not get news about Nazism. Starting from the 60s up until his death in the 80s, for all his imprisonment years that reached 40 years. In the early 80s, with his health declining, questions started to be asked like, indeed, Hess was a Nazi criminal, but imprisoning a man over 90 years who spent all that time in prison was that humanitarian. All I want to say is that there were questions about if that was fair or not. Was this man that important to be punished that much? 40 years in prison alone? Not just Hess? Family demanded his let go. Britain alone submitted 11 requests of his release, and 14 other requests from the US and France, in a letter from the British Prime Minister in 1982 to Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union. She told him there's no need to keep Hess in prison more. No, not! The man was 8 years old and in prison 40 years ago, and remained alone in prison for more than 16 years. The humanitarian conditions compel us to not treat him that way. But every time, the obstacle was the Soviets' refusal to release Hess, although Hess was proved innocent on the count of war crimes. He wasn't responsible for the Holocaust crimes in the extermination camps. Because he left Germany before it happened. Of course he wasn't an angel. He was the one who signed Nuremberg laws that prevented appointing Jews in governmental positions and prevented Jews marrying non-Jew Germans. The Soviet had their reasons, including their attitude towards Nazis in general, because Russia's human loss during World War reached 27 million people, according to the Soviet estimates. This tightening wasn't restricted to Hess. They once refused releasing two prisoners. 1 minute before their... time. The months of the Soviets' prison management were always the worst for prisoners. This prison was one of 2 institutes in Western Germany under the common management of the 4 forces of Allies. The second institution was the committee responsible for air safety above Berlin. That's besides that, Hess personally declared more than once that he didn't regret his actions. During the Nuremberg trials, he declared clearly, "I was honored to work under one of the greatest men of my people, all the last 1,000 years of my country. I don't regret anything. This man really astounds me. We keep making fun of him, but he has this personal trait I find impressive. I'm impressed by that man's honesty, loyalty, and compliance. He didn't want power at the time of power, and after the power went down, he was still loyal to Hitler and the concept after the concept failed and its leaders died. He had extreme loyalty to an extremely stupid concept and to an evil person. But in that story, this impresses me. Even after your leader died and lost the war, you still have loyalty and compliance. Keep them! This is impressive! Hess was impressive. That was all enough for Hess to remain in Spandau until he died on 17th August 1987. Of the age 93. On 17th September, a common statement was released from the 4 allies announcing his suicide. Do you expect the story ends here? That wasn't the end, because there was a huge debate if he was killed or suicide. Hess. Family believed that. Succeeding to suicide that way, and that age is impossible. He was there for 40 years and killed himself in the end. He got bored. They said even if that was true, he wouldn't do it himself, and that they suspected he was killed by the British intelligence. They requested the redo of the body's autopsy, and it was indeed redone, but the results came back as inconclusive. He might have been killed or not. Unfortunately, this isn't the end to the story as well. That was one of the stories that would never be buried, just like Hess, who even after his death, he paid for his symbolic status as his grave. After his death turned into a shrine for the newest shrine for the new Nazis, the authorities had to pressure his family to extract his remains in July 2011 and have them cremated. Then throw the ashes into the sea. Even the gravestone that said in German "I dared" was destroyed. The Spandau prison where he spent half of his life, his second home, half of his memories were made in that prison. It was demolished right after Hess's death, and for the irony, a mall was built in its place called Britain Center. His old cell is now a food court. The irony didn't stop here, because the name that this shopping mall was known by was Hess Co., which is a pun on a famous supermarket franchise in Britain called Tesco. So it became Hess Co. I have many reflections on this episode, but I can't quite express them. I'm truly impressed by the story. And impressed by that character. I'm not sure if I'd like him to be my friend or my enemy's friend. This is how I feel for now. Last but not least, don't forget to watch the old episodes and the new ones. Look at the sources! And subscribe if you're on YouTube. Yes. Story teaches us 2 important things. First, if you're loyal to an idea, try not to be that loyal, because any idea can be wrong. Second, if you'll be loyal that way, then not to Hitler. The world doesn't have better role models. Is there a shortage in role models? Choose something better, man! Don't be so Hess. And at that, though, a strange story, and a strange story in a strange episode. Thank you, my friend.